Hey everybody, this is Everyday Commentary, and this is a video overview of this knife. And this knife is the blackout version of the SOG Flash AT. This is part of the refresh of the SOG line. You might have noticed that the SOG Flash 1 is no longer in production, or is very diminished in production, and the SOG Flash 2 is similarly headed that way. This knife is a full-size knife. It retails for $75. It has a 3.44-inch blade. It weighs over 4 ounces, like 4.53 ounces, I think. And this is an overview, so I'm going to tell you what I like and what I don't like. But before we get to that, I'm going to do some size comparisons so you have an idea of how big this knife is. That's the SOG Flash AT, and that is the Benchmade Mini Grip. This is a single US dollar. As you can see, it's a pretty big knife. And finally, here it is next to a AA battery. Again, pretty big knife. Also really important, look how thick it is compared to a AA battery. It's about as thick as a AA battery. This is a hefty knife. So let's talk about what I like. So the first thing that I like is I really like the blade shape. The blade shape is awesome. It is a very simple, very nice, very classic drop point blade. That is awesome. The stock is not massively thick. Given how big the knife is and how thick the knife is, you'd think they'd really fatten up that stock, but they didn't do that, and that's a good thing. The next thing that I really like about this knife is I really like the handle. The handle, unlike the handle on the original Flash, is relatively simple. It has an index notch, and then that's it. You can see that the FRN is slightly contoured so that it's not a flat scale, and it really fits well in your hand. In addition to that, the handle makes sure that you don't hit hot spots on the pocket clip. So that's a really, really good thing. If you have a good blade and a good handle, you're doing quite well in terms of the knife game. So the last thing that I like about this knife is I love this pocket clip. SOG has had sort of a long-standing issue with their pocket clips. They've gone through a bunch of different designs. This is by far the simplest, and it is by far the best version. So all of those things are things that I really like. One thing that I just want to point out, sort of a neutral, is it does use the XR lock, which was introduced on the Terminus. It's very similar to the arc lock, which in turn is very similar to the Axis lock, but this knife uses that locking system, and you can see in there the sliding bar to pull the knife out of the way. So that's a neutral. But here's the thing that I really dislike about the knife. I do not like the fact that it is an assisted open. First of all, the assist is way, way too strong. It kicks too hard. It doesn't make a difference. You know, like I know that auto guys and assist guys like the fact that it kicks hard, but I prefer not to drop my knife. The other thing is the approach to the assist. It has to be dialed in perfectly. You know, I've been doing it a lot in the video because I've been practicing, but if you come up on a different angle as opposed to following this little scallop path right here, you're not going to open this knife. You can pull and it'll pop, but if you wanted to get it open where it opens quickly and confidently, you gotta follow that path. And then another sort of symptom of the illness that is the assist is it has this lock for a lock. And first of all, a lock for a lock is always stupid. If you design the knife right, you don't need a lock for a lock. But this knife's lock for a lock has one especially bad point, and let's see if you can see it. It's right there. This knife's lock for a lock has a red button, which means go. I think that we have taught our children since time immemorial that green means go and red means stop. So instead of being green, you have a black, which means it's in the lock position and it can't open, or you can switch it to the red, and now red means go, because apparently we're ignoring the fact that as a society, as a culture, and as a species on this planet, we mean red for stop and green for go. So the lock for a lock is not just stupid in a general sense, it's actually stupid in a specific sense here. The knife is $75, as I mentioned at the top of the review. It runs D2 steel, which I think is a decent, though not great steel. And it really is perfectly positioned in the market. It used to be that a $75 knife was a Delica and a mid-price knife, but the Delica has increased in price, the mini grip has increased in price. We're not really in a market anymore where a $75 knife is a mid-price knife. It's not a budget knife, but it's probably the lowest price you'll find, you know, 65, 75. You're starting to get knives that knife enthusiasts and people who use or like or know knives will buy, as opposed to just like this knife, which is like the cheapest knife you can find at Amazon. It's not a budget knife by any means. And by the way, this is a good knife. It's not a budget knife by any means, but it is also not a mid-priced knife anymore. This is what I would call like an entry-level knife. You're entering into the real world of knives. And for $75, you know, I wish that the entry level was cheaper. I wish it was what it was when I got into knives for the second time about 20 years ago, and it was, you know, $45, $50 you're talking about. You can get a real knife, a knife that a knife enthusiast would recognize as a good knife. Even if it wasn't the best knife, it had super ultra premium materials, it was a good knife. And now that's no longer the case. So in that marketplace, a $75 knife with D2 steel, all the features and designs that I showed you here, it's not a bad buy, and it's really sort of something that, if you think about it, it's hard to do a comparison. So you have a bunch of budget knives, and you have a bunch of mid-price knives, but this $75 area, there's not a whole lot here, especially for knives that are pretty beefy, pretty big. You know, I'm not a huge fan of that. That might be one of the things I'd say I don't like, but in this application where they're really trying to give you a folder that can do everything, a folder that can take a beating, they did a pretty good job. And so I'm not going to hold the weight or the heft against it, but it is strange to have a knife that you call an entry-level knife at $75. So again, I wish it was different. It's not the knife's fault, but that's just the way the market has panned out. Overall, you know, it's not the best knife in the world. I really wish it didn't have an assist. It would be a substantially better knife if it didn't. We don't need assists anymore. We have tuned detents. Like, going back to the Parrot. The Parrot is a $20 knife, and it has an absolutely silky deployment. And it doesn't use bearings. It doesn't use a flipper. It just has a nice pivot and a good detent. We do not need assisted opening knives anymore. I get that there's some applications for people that do, you know, different things with their knives than everyday carry, and that's fine. But for those folks, they generally have access to assists or autos, and so they don't need an assist. The assist is something that just doesn't need to exist. We don't need assists as people that carry our knives for everyday use, and the professionals don't need an assist because they have access to an auto. So that's the video overview of this knife, the SOG Flash AT. Look for a written review coming soon.